Tour's been great so far. It's been like almost a year since we toured the UK, so for us it was kind of, we weren't originally going to do this tour. Originally we were just going to release the album, and our first proper tour for the cycle was happening in March. We're announcing that I think next week or something. So we weren't going to do a tour, and then we were like, look, rather than doing a usual tour, why don't we play places that we haven't played for either a while or never played before. So we played Preston, we've never done that. Middlesbrough, we haven't been there for 3 years. Kent, Margate, never been to Margate. Leeds, we haven't played since, I don't know, 2010, early 2010. So then obviously we're finishing up in London because we wanted to do something for like the new album and all our friends, family, label, everything, like a big show in London. So it's been cool. It's been really fun playing the new songs live, and considering the album only came out a week ago, some of the responses to some of the new songs, they're almost on the par of the songs they've had for the last 2 years or whatever. So that's really encouraging, because our fears originally were that, you know, maybe these songs were more of growers than anything, and people already seem to feel quite attached to the songs, the new songs. So yeah, all good for us. We only played Loverboy. It was only at V that we played Loverboy, and that's because we didn't want the first time somebody heard our new stuff to be from a crackly YouTube video, because I think that can be quite misleading. For, you know, if we spent 4 or 5 months recording our album, and then if someone just hears it live for the first time, I don't think you get the same feeling, you don't get the same buzz from the song. So that's why. But now the album's out, we can play whatever we want, wherever we want, and that's a great feeling for us, because we were recording this back in March, April, May, and then we spent the summer basically mixing it ourselves, because all the mixes that we gave it to, they didn't do the songs that we wanted them to do. We've decided to kind of only play about 4 or 5 new songs, just to kind of introduce the new songs into the set, because I feel personally, I hate nothing more than going to see a band, like one of my favourite bands, and then they've got a new record, so they just flood the set with new songs, and then you're kind of sitting there being like, this is cool, but I don't really know the songs that well yet. So we've been worried about that, and we haven't, you know, put too many new songs in the sets. I think the band's like, I mean, we're not the band, no, we're nowhere near the band we were about 3 years ago. Obviously, we started when we were young. I mean, we were getting on the mega bus and using trains for our first few tours because we just wanted to play shows when we were like 16, 17. You know, now we're 21, 22. I mean, I think you change so much as a person in that time. It's kind of insane how much I've changed as a person. Like I still feel that I have, you know, all the things that I liked about myself when I was growing up, but just the way you think about things and the kind of music I listen to now is completely different to the music I listened to when we were making and writing Take Off Your Colours, for example. So I think that in a way that does kind of come through in our music now. And I think what's kind of cool is Chris, our guitarist, said this a few times. The reason he loves being in our band is because he feels that like our fans have grown up with us and their music tastes have either matured or developed with ours as well. So, I mean, if people didn't like the songs and music we're producing now, we wouldn't be selling out these kind of venues and we wouldn't be playing these kind of shows. So we wouldn't have had a midweek #1 record, you know. So obviously our fans who did love pop punk and just straight pop punk when we would love pop punk now like other stuff, and therefore they can connect with our newer stuff as well. So that's a really cool thing to have. I think every musician, every band, if you don't aspire to grow and challenge yourself like musically, then it's kind of, what's the point? It's kind of redundant, you know. You might as well just kind of live off one album and just constantly tour that. As fans of music ourselves, we know how important it is to not disown the sound that you've already kind of put out there and people have enjoyed. So for us to turn our backs on everything we've done up to this point would almost be shooting ourselves in the foot. So what we did was we kept the elements of Yumi at 6 that we feel people appreciate the most and people enjoy the most, and we've allowed those elements to remain in our music. Well, not allowed them, we wanted them to, but then we've also pushed ourselves in certain songs or in certain ways. I mean, we've got 1 or 2 really quite rockier, heavier songs, and then we've got a few songs like When We Were Younger and Crash, which for me, I never envisioned our band making that kind of music. Like When We Were Younger, we have a guy who does all the sampling for Bjork, and so he did that on that song, and for us, that was a big deal because we never thought that was going to happen, you know. And I think it took a really basic, like the song is so basic, but it's basically based around 3 chords and a vocal melody, which just grow and grow throughout the song. But by adding all these different samples and bringing the different instruments and kind of making, you know, go into a crescendo and drop down again. And I think, you know, we want to still sound like You Me at 6, but this is the album where we found who we are and what we are, and we're no longer just trying to emulate our favourite bands and their sound. And I think that's a really exciting point for a band when they realise, well, at least they feel they've realised, okay, now we've got our sound. Because a lot of individual musicians will spend their teens playing in loads of different bands and loads of different people, and by the time they start up their first proper band, they already all know exactly what it is they want to sound like and what they're going to do. With You Me at 6, this was all our first band. I mean, yeah, I played in a few bands when I was like 12, but whatever. So, I mean, it's almost like the 2 albums we've done to this point have helped us get to where we are now. So, the feedback we've had so far from the fans has basically been, this is your best album you've done. And I think, you know, whether they're just saying that because they think that's what we want to hear, or whether they genuinely mean it, I don't know for sure, but it definitely feels that way. So, you know what, there's a lot of bands, and I'm not kind of trash talking American bands and the way they do things, but there seems to be a thing where other bands that we know internally, they're quite happy to screw over their mates money wise, you know, and they take certain cuts and other people get certain things. We've always split things 5 ways. Like, I was given an opportunity where it's like, okay, you're the singer, you write all the lyrics, you write all the melodies, you can have 60% of the publishing. And I was like, well, these are my mates, and I'm not going to live and tour with them knowing that I've got X and they've got Y, because at the end of the day, we're a band, we're a unit, and we all do want the same things. We want to grow and achieve bigger and better things. I think the thing with You Me at 6, which I think usually kind of stands out, there's a lot of people like, oh, you know, it's great, you know, you've just done that tour, that must be amazing. And we're like, it was great, but we're already planning the next one. We already know what we want to achieve next. And I think to have, you know, you can have expectations and you can have like goals, and to not achieve them isn't necessarily a failure, but it's better to have them, you know, as a guideline, as something that you want to, you know, at least shoot for. And I think, you know, with Sinners Never Sleep, we were like, look, if we can get another top 5 album, that would be amazing, because Hold Me Down did that. And we almost said that anything less than a top 5 album would actually be considered on our part as a failure from us, that our music hadn't managed to grow and our fan base hasn't managed to grow. And yet when we got that phone call, and I think it's Tuesday, saying, oh, you're number 1 at the moment, we lost our minds, because not in a million years did we expect that, but it wasn't that even that we had the number 1, it was that we got higher than number 5. So for us, that was our achievement. So I think there's so many other things that we want to achieve, that as long as you've got that kind of incentive to continue to grow and to continue to kind of achieve things, then that's why we want to keep making music, and, you know, just to see how far we can take it, basically. I mean, why not? We are the kind of band that we hang out just as much when we're at home as when we do on tour, so it's kind of like we never really feel like we're off the road completely, because our band has been non-stop for the last 4 years. Like, if we're not on tour, we're writing. If we're not writing, we're on tour, and that's the way it's always been. We haven't had any time off. We don't really want it. I wouldn't be able to tell you the last time I had a summer holiday or a beach holiday, but at the same time, I don't really need one, because what I do isn't classified as a real job, you know. And I think there's very few people that can say they genuinely love what they do, and I think if you get that in any walk of life, then you're very, very lucky. So that's why we just kind of roll with it. We watched a lot of like band documentaries or band DVDs, and what we realise is that you can spend your whole career trying to be another band, or you can spend your whole career trying to please people that maybe don't like your music or whatever, or you can just be like, well, their opinion's not going to change, so the only thing that we can do is just put out something that's honest and just plain and simple. So we said to the director, Tim Mattia, when he came out, we were like, look, we want to do all our interviews separately, we want you to ask us all the same questions, and we just want 5 different perspectives on all the questions that you ask. And that's all we did. And obviously we filmed a recording, we had footage from some live shows we've done, and what was interesting was I learnt things about my bandmates from watching that documentary. And it was also interesting how a lot of our high points are very similar and a lot of our low points are very similar. However, the low points you never really speak to one another about, and yet I would hear, you know, what some of the guys felt. For example, you know, when certain members of our family passed away, or when we fell out, or, you know, these kind of things. It's just interesting to see that actually the whole time when we thought, oh, we're pretty disconnected and, you know, we're not as close as we think we are, actually we were, but we just didn't talk about it, therefore there was no kind of clarity on the situation. So I think Bite My Tongue, the documentary, is a very interesting kind of DVD if you're a fan of our band. I think it's very insightful. I think you learn something about us, and I think you get to know us all better as individuals. And however, if you don't like our band, or you're kind of on the fence, or you just clearly don't know anything about it, I think it's quite a nice introduction to the band. And plus, Sinners Never Sleep is kind of constantly playing in the background of the record, so, you know, you can almost kind of learn the songs without, you know, to listen to the record. So I think just a lot of energy, a lot of, you know, a lot of good fun. I think we always try and put on a show because at the end of the day, people spend good money going to see bands play, and hard-earned money as well. And I think there's nothing worse than going to see a band and them acting like you're doing them a favour by being there. You know, at the end of the day, like, if people are going to turn up and see our band, and I'm going to go out and give them every single thing I've got, to the point where I come on stage and I can't even talk. You know, and that happens pretty much 8% of the time when we play a show, and we come off with drenched in sweat and we feel disgusting, and we're like, that's when you know you've put on a good show. If you come off, you know, feeling exactly the same way you went on, then you've done nothing to warrant being on that stage. So in regards to Yumi 6, we're the kind of band that we go for it, and we just try and just have a good time, because at the end of the day, that's the point of live music, is just have a good time. So yeah, that's what I'd say.